The chair recognizes the honourable member for Calgary-Shepherd.
Thank you, Speaker. Smart move. I caught your eye right away so I could rise and speak on this issue once again. And raised matters are of great importance to the residents of my riding in Calgary-Shepherd, and who do care about government accountability and the efforts of the government to continue to hide nearly 30,000 pages of blacked out, redacted documents that this House and a majority of members of Parliament have ordered the production of, that everybody agrees should be given to us. And this is why this Parliament is now paralyzed, because the Government of Canada, the cabinet ministers who sit in the front benches over here, continue to refuse to provide these essential documents that they then be passed on by the law clerk to the RCMP. Again, I want to reiterate the point that it is a great privilege and an honor to rise and speak on behalf of the residents of my riding. It's been now over 3 years that they've given me the privilege of representing them in this Parliament. I assured them when I was first elected that government accountability would be my top priority. I didn't know at the time, though, that the openness of government and open government by default would be the slogans that the Liberal government would be using. In fact, they've produced an entire document, Mr. Speaker, that is, it says just that. It was first released in 2015, then it was updated in 2024 to ensure accessibility, and I will be quoting from it extensively to remind the Cabinet of its mandate letters, to remind the Cabinet of the document they all signed onto when they took the oaths of office, became cabinet ministers, and had this government in 2015 sloganeered incessantly for the first 4 years it was there. And now we're at the point where they are refusing an order of Parliament to produce documents that they have in their possession, that we all agree that we should all have. And it's not just happening here on the floor of the House of Commons, it's also happening in parliamentary committees. We saw this happen during multiple other scandals involving, say, the We Charity, involving the SNC-Lavalin scandal. This is a repeat performance of cabinet ministers in this document, with the document protection they do to protect their own political hides, is they're doing what's right by taxpayers and citizens of this country and just giving over the documents. If there is nothing to hide, they should just hand everything over unredacted. So the Green Slush Fund, that's the term we've been using to describe it after an Auditor General's report slammed how this fund performed after the Liberals removed all of the previous persons involved on the board of directors and replaced them with their own cronies. Its original name was the SDTC Fund, the Sustainable Development Technology Fund. SDTC Canada had, up until 2017, when a previous Liberal cabinet minister started to muck around with his board of directors, had actually a clean bill of health. If you go back to Auditor General's reports in multiple years, they had a clean bill of health in those audits. Starting in 2017, though, multiple problems began to appear. And this is now, the issue at hand for weeks and months now. This Parliament has been paralyzed because the Government of Canada, the cabinet ministers, refused to follow through with that order, as I mentioned. When the Auditor General did its review, it found that almost $400 million was misspent, corruptly spent. And that is just on a sample. That's not all the projects, Mr. Speaker. That is not all the projects. The Auditor General actually hasn't had a chance to go through every single project to find out if money was spent corruptly in those situations. In the sample that was used, in one of the samples, 10 of 58 projects that were audited, they found $59 million of payouts that failed to meet even the SDTC's own eligibility requirements. If you go through some of those emails that are being shared between the board chair and persons operating within the fund, they were telling the board chair, this project that you are bringing forward, so board chair bringing programs of her own, projects of her own, which she has a conflict of interest involved, they were saying, oh, this doesn't qualify for this particular fund, but we will find you another fund so you can get this money that you are asking for. And they did. In fact, they did. That's a situation of corruption in that particular case. There was another case of $76 million that were awarded despite the fact there were clear conflicts of interest. And this on top of the fact that there was a senior assistant deputy minister who sat in every single one of those meetings. And that should have been an immediate red flag. It should have been going up straight to the minister's office to inform them of what was going on. And I don't believe that these ministers can claim that the minister at the time, Navdeep Bains, the new minister now, that everybody was just asleep at the switch. They just, gosh darn it, they did not know what was going on. You know, they're kind of like this crew that comes up upon an accident scene and says, you know, gosh, I can't believe this accident happened. Where they're the ones that caused it. They're the ones that created the situation, that invited corrupt behavior, invited misspending, invited people to take advantage of the taxpayer. And that's what they've done. In fact, when, you know, there was a previous chair of this, of the SDTC, the Green Slush Fund Board, when it wasn't yet the Green Slush Fund because it was getting these clean audits done by the Auditor General. I believe it was Jim Balsillie. Jim Balsillie has a reputation. He speaks his mind. He's well known amongst Canadians as a gentleman who has had a great career in finance and technology, and he speaks his mind. He freely attacks all sides of the House, I would say, whenever he sees things that don't match up with what are his beliefs. And that just did not fit the minister at the time's views, so he fired him and replaced him with Annette Verscherian. In fact, that same Annette Verscherian confirmed before committee that she's never applied for a job. She's never applied for a job, never had to. And then it went on to say at committee, and contradict him, I'll say, the minister at the time, Navdeep Bains, who claimed that they hired them from the people who were applying. That's how she got this job. That's how she was chosen as chair. She specifically said she never applied for that job. The job was posted, and then the job was taken down, and she was awarded that particular position. That they recruited her. He called her twice to personally recruit her, despite the fact that she reminded him that she had conflicts of interest. Those same conflicts of interests then came up during those decision-making, because in some of those decisions, she was at the table making the decisions that later on the Auditor General found were corruptly made, corruptly done. And this is where we find ourselves here, where a fund that used to function just, it seemed properly, because it was getting clean audits from the Auditor General, doesn't exist anymore. This is how bad it is, Speaker. This entire fund was completely shut down and rolled into the NRC, the National Research Council, because that's how fast the Liberals wanted to run away with it. They thought that that would be enough to simply sweep it under the rug. There's nothing to see here. Mistakes were made. It's like one of those old episodes of Yes Minister from the 1980s. Highly recommend them to anyone in the House to listen to. Sometimes you'll get that whiplash experience where you'll say, I've experienced that. And I can say, we're experiencing right now. They're claiming, you know, lessons were learned. It's like one of those private secretaries at a UK committee in this comedy series. Lessons were learned, we'll never do those again. Mistakes were made. It was an interesting pilot project. You know, there was some corruption. There's nothing much to see here. We should just move on. And they admit to it. And then they shut down the fund completely. And it is indeed the Green Slush Fund when, you know, close to half was improperly spent. So then this House, by a majority vote, a lot of the arguments I hear from one particular member on the other side of the House, because it seems nobody else wants to rise to defend this or is not allowed to, is that, you know, there's charter implications. The RCMP doesn't want the document. The law clerk has problems with it. All these people have problems. Those are all arguments that should have been made in June when we first voted on the matter. And a majority of parliamentarians decided that the minority was wrong. And at the time, the Bloc, the New Democrats, and the Conservatives all agreed that these documents should be made public, that they should just be made available to the public and then passed on to the RCMP. In fact, the law clerk even confirmed, and I have the sessional paper here from the law clerk to the House Speaker, that the law clerk will comply. And the law clerk said, and law clerk and parliamentary counsel shall provide forthwith any documents received by him pursuant to this order to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. So the law clerk has no problem, will dutifully do the job that he's here to do, and will then simply pass on everything to the RCMP. And then in the same letter, it goes on to say, this is from Michel Bédard, November 18, 2024, it goes on to say, all three government institutions provided documents containing redactions and or withheld some pages purportedly relying on the Access to Information Act. A copy of the letters I received are reproduced in the annex. And we know there continue to be documents that government agencies and institutions refuse to provide us. One of them is ISED, that continues to refuse to comply with the motion from Parliament, where it compels them to provide all of the information. And Speaker, we know this from past rulings from the Chair and the Speaker. We know this from government documents, and there is a terrific manual that members of Parliament should be using from a former Liberal MP, Derek Lee. The House has an absolute right to documents. The taxpayers and citizens pay for these documents to be produced. They've paid for it already, so now they have a right to see it. Orders to produce documents are not common. I would say that they are rare. They're in rare situations, there's an order to produce a document. And in this situation, while the government has produced some of the documents, it has chosen to redact 30,000 pages of it and to not see them handed to RCMP. I'll note, too, that a common argument that is being used on the opposite side says the RCMP doesn't want the documents, and that is absolutely false. The RCMP has not said that. In fact, the RCMP commissioner exiting the Hogue inquiry room was scrummed by reporters, and when he was asked the question, had he received the documents, had the RCMP received the documents, he said the RCMP did, that they have them, and that they will take them. And it's up to them whether they want to use them. At no point does the order of the House tell the RCMP how to use this particular document. It doesn't instruct them that they must use it. I will also add, Speaker, that in the documentation provided by the RCMP, in the letter that was sent to committee on July 26, 2024, it also distinctly, this is directly from the letter I'm going to quote, the RCMP has also reviewed the implications of the motion in a potential criminal investigation. Goes on to say, the parliamentary production order does not set aside the legal requirements. The legal requirements that they're referring to are about privacy. It goes on to say, for the reasons set out above, the RCMP's ability to receive and use information obtained through this production order and under the compulsory powers afforded by the Auditor General Act to the course of a criminal investigation could give rise to concerns under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It is therefore highly unlikely that any information obtained by the RCMP under the motion where privacy interests exist could be used to support a criminal prosecution or further a criminal investigation. That is not saying they don't want it. It is not saying they can't use it. They're saying in a privacy interest matter. At nowhere do I note there that they've said that the Charter of Rights and Freedoms was intended to be used as a shield against government corruption. Nowhere. That was never the intentions of the original founders of that document, to use the Charter to protect government cabinet ministers from accusations of corruption and a potential criminal investigation by the RCMP. That is the argument, that is the lead argument the government is making today. So, let's go back to what the cabinet ministers have all agreed to do. In past mandate letters, there's been a common reference, even in the latest one, about open and accountable government. I'll note this reference is to a public document that is available on the website of the Prime Minister, Open and Accountable Government 2015, Speaker. So it says on page 34, public access to information and privacy, the government is committed to ensuring that government data and information is open by default, in formats that are modern and easy to use. 30,000 pages of blacked out ink for documents is not easy to use. It goes on to say, when producing papers in Parliament, ministers are expected to ensure that the requests for information are met. Matters related to the production of papers in Parliament are coordinated with the Leader of the Government in the House of Commons. And now they've refused to comply with one of the very first initial government documents that they all signed on to, Speaker. They all agreed to do this. They had no problems at the time to sloganeer and claim that they were going to be the most open and government in the history of Canada, that they would never, ever, in a million years, ever dare to even think about keeping something from the public. And then we had the SNC scandal, then we had the WEF scandal, then we've had ministers be fired because they didn't want to do whatever the Prime Minister ordered them to do, to hide information from the public. And we've learned our lesson as Canadians, as parliamentarians, to distrust everything the Prime Minister, the Prime Minister's office or PCO has to say. And much of this is at the direction of the Prime Minister's office and at PCO to continue to hide documents. This is intentional. The paralysis of Parliament here is intentional by the Liberal government, because they know darn well if they just give the 30,000 redacted pages, this all ends, this all stops. Every single private member's bill on the Conservative side, on all the opposition sides, we've lost all of those slots. This is my opportunity to remind you, Speaker, of how low you drew me in the private member's bill draw as well, because I think I was drawn third from the bottom when you did those draws. There's my gentle admonishment of you, Speaker, for drawing me so low and not giving me the opportunity to have a private member's bill.
I really appreciate that. I do want to thank the honourable member because he was like the only member of Parliament that was there watching the draw, and I felt really bad at doing that. The honourable member for Calgary Shepherd.
Thank you, Speaker, for recognizing that fact. That I was indeed there because I was hoping to be drawn to the high number so I could put down another private member's bill, perhaps on the disability tax credit, on bereavement leave, which was something that this House was able to agree in C3, so let it not be shown that we can't reach some type of accommodation. Actually happened right before Christmas too. So perhaps we can have a Christmas miracle again this year, and we can have those 30,000 pages of unredacted documents given out to the public so that the RCMP and the Parliamentary Law Clerk can see it. It's happened before in 2021. That was my private member's bill that was introduced into C3 in a deal that was made at the time. So let it not be said that the official opposition, that Conservatives can't make Parliament work. I also remind the Chamber, there are 6 Conservative private members' bills that have passed into law. I think actually in this fall session of Parliament, it's possible that we have passed as many private members' bills on the Conservative side as the government has. That might be a first in Canadian history even, because of their own decisions to paralyze Parliament and not have them proceed with government bills. Later in the document, the open and accountable one that they've chosen to ignore now, talking about ministerial relations with Parliament, there's a fantastic paragraph on page, and I'll draw the attention of the House, page 16, but if you're in the PDF document, it's page 54 of 267. And it goes on to say, the Prime Minister expects ministers to demonstrate respect and support for the parliamentary process. They should place a high priority on ensuring that Parliament and its committees are informed of departmental policy priorities, spending plans, management challenges, including by appearing before parliamentary committees whenever appropriate. And it goes on and on to say what these priorities should be, how they should be giving information. Give information with information needs to fulfill its role of legislating, approving the appropriation of funds, and holding the government to account. This is this situation. We ordered for the production of documents. The government is defying its most basic government policy, the one that is keep being referenced in mandate letters. And like I've said before, this is not the first time. This happens at parliamentary committees as well, including my own on the Standing Committee for Citizenship and Immigration, where we now have an order to produce documents of a briefing note on the changes to the international student program, where the government has again defied the order to produce the documents, and we're finding ourselves again in a situation where we're reordering the production of documents and more documents. And you know, Speaker, the most interesting thing that happened is that the Liberal members of that committee tried to throw the Deputy Minister under the bus and say that if he didn't show up within if the documents weren't released within the 30 mandatory days, that on the 31st day, the Deputy Minister would be obliged to appear and explain himself on why he didn't produce the documents. So if anybody out there still believes anything this government has to say about open government, open by default, doing things on behalf of Canadians, having their best interests of Canadians in mind, they should take a moment to go through these quotations and citations about what they've actually, and they have paralyzed Parliament, Speaker. And if that's all that they had done, that I would say on the opposition side, that might not be so bad, but what they've also done is they just blew through an extra almost $25 billion of spending this week that they had the other opposition parties vote for it. This is money that Canadians just don't have. So not only are they blocking Parliament, spending billions of dollars like this, and right before we end, Speaker, because I always have a Yiddish proverb, something appropriate to the particular situation. I know members wait for it too. Some I use more often than others, but if I know on a three-legged stool, if one of those legs was the word of this government, their solemn ability to fulfill their promises, you would fall right off of that stool. You could not lean on that stool and actually trust it in order to sit on it. And it's a great Yiddish proverb that is very much true. This is the most untrustworthy government you could ever find. They claimed these things in 2015. They sloganeered on it, and they have been incapable of keeping their word to parliamentarians and to the citizens of Canada that they would in fact be open by default, like their government document claims, that they would work with parliamentarians and ensure that Parliament can meet its accountability function. It's in the very documents that they have never reneged on, never rejected, but they refuse to comply. There are 30,000 pages of redacted documents missing. So let's have a Christmas miracle, Speaker. Let's have those documents released.